Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. Today I thought I'd do another little demonstration like I've done a couple times in the past. And I thought I would take a character and do a very simple, basic rig for the character. I like to use for my examples these sculpting base meshes that come with Maya 2016. If I click the sculpting base meshes advisor, it will open up after it loads. And you can see here I have a bipeds folder with lots of provided character models. So I'm just going to right click and import on one of them, close that, and you see it's very large in my scene, so I'm going to scale it down like 0.1, like so. So this is like a Cyclops ogre type of character. So because I scaled it down, you can see in the channel box my scale XYZ is 0.1. So I want to freeze transformations on this character and make it to have a scale value of a full value of 1 for scale XYZ by going to modify, freeze transformations. So you can see here now my scale values are at 1. Also, before you start rigging any kind of character, you typically want their history to be deleted. Like if I had actually modeled this character, there'd probably be a lot of modeling history and such. If I had UV'd it and textured it and everything else like that, there would be a lot of history related to those actions associated with this model. So I can select the model, go to Edit, Delete by Type, and there's History. And you see there's a shortcut, Alt-Shift-D, to delete the history. And I didn't have any history because I didn't actually make this model, but that's how you would delete the history before you started to rig. So the first step is done to kind of set the model up for rigging. Next is to actually start the rigging process. And I'm going to go to my front view like this. I'm going to go to shading and make sure I have X-ray joints checked on. And in my rigging menus, I'll go to skeleton, create joints. So the first joint I tend to make is the root joint or the pelvis joint, and is typically in the center of the character in the pelvic region around here. I'm going to hold down the X key for snap to grid, left click and drag. You can see my joint that's being created. I'm going to put it about there, and that actually might be a tad high. I'll just move it down slightly. Press the Y key, which is the shortcut key to redo the last tool I just did, which was the joint tool. I'll click the existing joint I made, which is joint 1, and that activates that joint with the joint creation tool, the create joints tool, and then I can continue to create joints from that position. I'm going to hold down X again and click and drag, and you see again my joint is snapping to the grid and a bone is being created between the two joints. I'm just going to snap to grid up the spine of this character like so. That might be a few too many joints for the spine, but that's okay. Go back to my perspective view, you can see what we have, and because I have X-ray joints turned on, I can see my joint chain through my character mesh. I'll go to the right side view and we can reposition these joints. I'm going to start with the joint 2, which is not the root joint, not the first joint. I'm just going to kind of reposition these joints along the chain here, and depending on what kind of character you're working with, you can reposition them in different ways. I'm going to kind of follow this kind of flow of the spine. Now I'm not following like rigid anatomically correct spine position, like your spine is literally going to be in the back of your body here. This is more in the center, kind of centered on the body but favoring toward the back a little bit, that kind of region. And the actual root joint I would like to move closer to the middle, and I'm going to hold down the D key, which is edit pivot mode, and move this joint over like this. I'll do the same for some of these joints just to kind of get that joint flow a little smoother. So we have something like this. And this first joint I'll rename root, And you can go through and rename all these joints to be like spine 1, spine 2, and so on. I'll go back to my front view for now. Go back to my Create Joints tool. So let's go with the leg now. I'm going to show the wireframe of the model just so I can kind of know where the edge loops are that are going to be controlling the deformation of the model itself. So I'm going to create my hip joint about the center of the leg at the top where the leg meets the torso. And then my knee joint will be approximately here. And my ankle joint will be where the foot meets the leg, right through here somewhere. I'll go now to the right side view, and you can see how that chain was created in a straight line. It's not going to be right on track with the flow of the geometry yet. But I'm going to go ahead and create a joint about right here for the foot. And I'm going to hold down Shift and left click and drag to put a joint at the tip of the foot there. And then I'll hit enter. So now I'm going to reposition these joints. I'll hold down the D key to edit them individually. If I don't hold down the D key and move the joint, it moves the whole chain. If I hold down D, then I can move that joint by itself like that. I'll hold down D and reposition the ankle to be about right there. I like to have a little bit of a bend in the leg joint chain just so the knee joint will kind of bend realistically. I might move this back slightly, like so. This is my ankle, this is kind of the ball of the foot, and the toe. So back in my perspective view, I can kind of take a look and see what we have. Because the foot of the model is kind of splayed out a little bit, I'm going to grab the ankle joint and rotate it. So because my ankle joint rotation is slightly off, what I'm going to do is go into component mode, which is right here. In these component selection masks, I can choose the question mark, which the question mark, if I right click on it, you can see all the things that are associated with the question mark icon. And one of them is the local rotation axis. And that's what I'm editing here, is the local rotation axis of the ankle joint. So I'm going to rotate this so that Y faces up like this. And my Y rotation handle is horizontal to the joint. Go back to object mode, and now I can rotate this joint chain like this and orient it with the foot. Okay. So now I can select the hip joint here, hold down Shift and select the root joint and press P to parent them. And that creates a link between the pelvis joint and the left hip joint right there. And again, I can rename these, which is probably smart to do. Left hip. Go down and change this to left knee. I think this can be left ankle. Left ball, I call it the ball because the ball of the foot. And left toe. Okay, so that's what we have so far. I'll go back to my front view. And now we'll do the arm. We'll do the left arm. Skeleton, create joints. Now there's lots of different ways you can do this shoulder region, and every way has its pros and cons. You could just, for example, create a shoulder joint about kind of center mass of the shoulder, about where you think the rotation pivot should be, and go down to the elbow, and then down to the wrist, like so. Now one thing I do tend to like to do, if you look at the orientation of this joint, you can see how it's straight up and down, right? If we look back at our elbow joint though, you can see how that is now rotated slightly to be along the flow of the joint path. Let me undo that a little bit and you can kind of see what I mean. So I left clicked here and I added the shoulder joint, right? So now I'm going to add the elbow joint. But if you look at the plus sign or the crosshair that makes up the orientation of this joint, when I click and drag, when I click and create the elbow joint, so I'm clicking the elbow joint, you can see right there, and then when I let go, watch the shoulder joint. You see how it rotated and now it's kind of pointing in this direction? And now you notice the elbow joint is straight up and down with no rotation to it, no flow to it. And when I click for the wrist joint and let go, the elbow joint rotates now to go along with the flow of the joint chain. And so now the wrist joint is again straight up and down. So one thing I like to do, just out of practice, is to left click down here and create another joint that flows the direction I want the wrist joint to also flow. You see when I let go, that wrist joint also rotated. But then I just hit delete because I don't actually need that joint. But all that joint did was rotate this joint so that it is going the flow direction of the joint chain that I want. I hope that makes sense. I hit enter to finish that. Now you could put in a joint here for your forearm controls if you'd like, but I'm kind of doing a basic skeleton rig, nothing too complicated. I mean, even putting a forearm joint is not that complicated, but it would be like the next step up in complexity. Another thing you could do is have a control joint perhaps in here between the spine and the shoulder joint to kind of hold this area in place a little bit, which is not a bad idea. But I'm just going to go ahead and parent the shoulder joint here to the spine. But yeah, it's probably a good idea to have some kind of control joint area through here to kind of help maintain the deformation between the shoulder and the torso. So this is the left shoulder down to the left elbow. It's misspelled. Down to the left wrist. And when I go back to my perspective view, you can see that it's not quite where I want it to be. So I'm going to move the shoulder joint so it's more center mass of the arm. And then I'm going to rotate it so that the elbow joint is toward the back of the arm like that. And then I'll rotate the elbow joint so that the wrist joint is more back toward the center mass of the arm. Because again, just like the leg, I like to have a slight bend in the arms and legs for where the rotation of the knee and elbows should be. Okay, so next we can add the fingers. And you can imagine the fingers are a little bit more complex, but not really. It's just a matter of, it's just kind of tedious creating all the little finger joint chains. I'm going to go into the right side, actually front view. So I'm going to choose a finger. I'm going to click right here at the knuckle. Kind of click down here through the finger. If you remember with the arm, I created that extra joint after I made the wrist. I'm going to do the same thing with the end of the finger. So this joint at the end of the finger will rotate to orient with the flow of the joint chain. I'm just going to create another joint out here and delete it just to orient that joint there. So there's my finger. I'm going to kind of center it with the pointer finger there. Now one thing to make a note of as I look closer at these joints, because I have the joints selected, it's a little hard to see, but because whenever they're selected, they highlight green, right? But if you look really closely at the joint right here, you can see there's a blue line here and a red line here, and there is also a green line here. That green line kind of blends in with the rest of the green because of the selected joint, but that red, blue, and green line are giving you the joint's orientation or direction it's facing. So this joint's z-axis is going to the left, the x-axis is going down toward the other joint, and the y-axis is pointing out this way. So those little colored lines are giving you a little hint as to that joint's orientation. Now if you notice, these three joints, the Z or the blue handle is all facing to the right, but that first joint, that blue handle is facing to the left. I want to have all my joints be consistently oriented, okay? So I'm going to change the orientation of that first knuckle joint to match the other joints. So I'm going to again go to component mode, and the question mark is still selected from before. I'm going to click on that local rotation axis for that joint, and then I can hit the E key for rotation and rotate it. So I rotated it this way, but you'll notice my X is going up. These X's are all going down. So I'm going to rotate it some more. So again, more closely matches the other joints that are in the chain, so it's all consistent. So now my Z-axis is going to the right, just like the others. My Y-axis is facing toward the palm of the hand, and my X-axis is facing down the flow of the joint chain. So now I can go back to my object mode, And you can look at those little lines now and you see they're all match, which is what I want. So now I can duplicate, Control D, this joint chain and move it over and make any adjustments I need to make it work with the other finger. I can hold down D key and kind of reposition these joints around to kind of get them where I want them to be. This finger is slightly longer than the other. And I tend to duplicate the original joint chain instead of any modified ones. So I'll hit Control D on this one again, move it over here for this finger. This finger more closely matches the original, so I think I'm going to leave it alone for the most part. I'll select the original again, duplicate, move it over here for the pinky. The pinky is obviously much smaller, so I'll need to make some changes. Hold down D key to move the joints individually as opposed to the entire chain. Now because these two joints are both way down here, I am going to move the whole chain just to move them both up at the same time and not hold D. And then for the last joint, because there is no joint after it, I don't have to hold D for it either. I can just move it up to the tip. And then I can rotate the whole chain slightly just to kind of orient it along the middle of that finger. Okay. So for the thumb, let's go to the right side view and kind of see the thumb here. And I'll just kind of create a chain starting with this knuckle where it meets the hand to the tip of the thumb there. And again, I'll create like this extra joint way down here just to change that joint's orientation and then delete that one. Go back to my perspective view, and obviously this joint's way over there in an inappropriate position. So once I get it positioned the way I want, I can check the orientation. Looks like the blue handle is different for these two compared to these two, so I'll need to change their orientations to match these down here. So again, component mode, question mark selected, and I will rotate it this way. Same with this joint, because I want it to be oriented in a similar fashion. So something like that. Back to object mode. So there's all my finger joints, pretty much where I want them to be. I'll select the roots of each finger joint, which would be the topmost knuckle. Hold shift and select my wrist joint last. And then when I press P, they all will parent to the wrist joint, like so. And you can go in and name all your finger joints, and I recommend you name all your joints appropriately. Just for the sake of demonstration purposes, I'm not going to take that time right now. Oops. Let's go to the right side view. Let's go ahead and continue the spine and press Y for the Create Joints tool and click on this upper spine joint. And I'm going to make one about right here where the neck meets the head. And we can put one like just kind of out here like so and hit enter. This joint out here doesn't really serve much of any purpose. I tend to do that just for the sake of having some kind of directionality in the skeleton for the sake of the head. You could potentially end the skeleton right here and use this joint to rotate the head around and not have to worry about any other joints. If you do need, like for example, ears to move, or if the character wears a hat, or if you want the character's face to be rigged with a joint system, you would want to have some kind of head joints in place here. Now this neck joint I'm going to want to use to rotate the head left and right, but again the orientation is not quite right for that, so I'm going to go back to object mode and I'm going to rotate this so that the y-axis is facing more upwards. I'll kind of angle it a little bit this way because he's kind of hunched a little bit, and that should be fine like that. And go back to object mode. Okay, so now we have our 1/2 of our skeleton. I can select now the left shoulder joint, go to skeleton mirror joints, and go into the options here. I'm going to mirror across the YZ axis, which would be YZ, this plane. And I have it set here to search for the letter L in the name and replace with the letter R, because these joints are all L shoulder, L wrist, L elbow, and so on. It'll search for L, replace with R, hit mirror. So now it's R shoulder for right shoulder, right elbow, and right wrist. I'll do the same for the left hip. Skeleton mirror joints, and now it's right hip, right knee, right ankle. So now we have our basic skeleton formed for our ogre guy, like so. So the next step is the actual binding process. So again, you want to make sure your model history is deleted. You want to make sure that the mesh has been frozen in place. The transformations have all been frozen. Modify, freeze transformations like so. And once that's all done, you can select the mesh, hold shift, and select the root joint. And then I'll go to skin, bind skin, and we'll go into the options. Edit, reset our settings, and we have our default settings here. So there's lots of stuff in here, but the main two things we're going to look at is the max influences and the drop-off rate. The max influences refers to the number of joints that each point on the surface of the model can be deformed by. Okay, so the mesh of the model, you see all the wireframe of the guy, the character here. All these places where these edges intersect are where vertices are, and each vertex of the polygonal mesh can be deformed by the skeleton to make the character move. Okay, so the maximum influences that you're setting here is telling each vertex how many joints to look for to change their position when the character moves. The more joints you have, then the more influences you allow, the more joints each point can be deformed by. I tend to limit this to about 2. I can lower this down to about 2 maximum influences. You can go to 3 maybe. I tend not to go too high. Then is our drop-off rate. The drop-off rate is a distance between each vertex and the joints that are being affected by it. So again, like I said, it's looking for 2 influences, and the drop-off rate determines how far each vertex is willing to look to find those 2 influences. The higher the drop-off means the smaller distance, the smaller range that each vertex is going to look to find its influences. A low drop-off rate means it drops off slowly. The rate is small, so the drop off slowly, which means a larger radius. Okay, and a higher drop-off rate. Remember, it's not a high drop-off distance, it's the drop-off rate, the rate of drop-off, the speed of the drop-off. How fast does the drop-off kick in, for example? So a high drop-off rate means it's going to drop off quickly, which means the radius will be actually smaller. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. I like to increase this drop-off rate up to like 7 or 8 or so the drop-off rate is smaller, so they're not looking too far away for their influences. That way, with a high drop-off like this, like for example, the finger joints over here will not be affecting the leg, for example. So with max influences, I lower down to 2. Drop-off rate I like to increase up to like 7 or so. The other stuff you can feel free to look at. The main one is bind to, and we're going to bind to the joint hierarchy, which means I have the root joint selected, so it's going to look at all the joints in the hierarchy when we're binding this guy to the skeleton. The other options here could be like the selected joints, for example. So right now, if I were to choose selected joints, the only joint that the character will bind to is the root joint, not any of the other ones, which I don't want that. And then there's object hierarchy, which is something else. But right now we're just looking at joint hierarchy. Closest distance is the bind method. We're going to leave it like that. Classic linear skinning method, you can kind of play with these different options to see the kind of different results you get. These are kind of the basic options for a basic result. And now I'll click bind skin. So now the skin has been bound to the rig or to the skeleton. If I were to press 4 for wireframe and choose the skeleton, you can see the mesh highlights purple like that. That means that the mesh is now being affected by the skeleton. So now if I select the shoulder joint and rotate it, it's going to be perfectly, awesomely optimized. The arm's going to move just like you expect it to, right? Not quite. So like anything in Maya, you're not going to have a one-button solution necessarily that everything is just fixed perfectly and it moves just like you expect it to and everything's awesome. There is obviously some tweaking that's going to need to be made, some little fixes to little issues, because you're dealing with lots of different points and they can react in imperfect ways. So the next stage of our rigging process, we're going to paint skin weights. Okay, the weight refers to the strength that each joint has on the mesh. So I'm going to select the mesh just to kind of show you. We're going to go to skin. Down here we have weight maps, and we're going to paint skin weights and go in the options. So these are our paint skin weights options here. Lots of stuff in here. The main thing we're going to look at right now though is this list. This is our influence list, and our influences are the joints. When you select an influence or select a joint, you can see the influence it has on the mesh with this white and black gradient. So let's look at the left shoulder. Scroll down here and find left shoulder so you can see the influence the left shoulder has on the mesh. So down here in the rib cage, it's all being pulled out like this because it has influence there. The brighter the white color is, the more influence it has, and the darker it is, the less influence it has, down to black, which is 0 influence. All right. So we'll scroll down here a little bit, and we have our paint settings. Most of this stuff we don't really need to know too much about. It's mainly the paint operation and then the opacity and the values down here. So we have different paint operations. The main two would be replace and add, and then there's also smooth. Okay, replace will replace the existing weight with a new weight that you specify with these values, and then add will add to the existing weight with these values, the value you have selected. So here's the method that I tend to go with. When I want to remove weight, I'll say replace a weight value of 0 where I want it to be black. And I can hold down the B key and increase my brush size here. And so all this area down here under the arm, I don't want the shoulder joint to influence. So I have with a value of 0, I'm going to replace all this with 0, which removes it from the shoulder. So I'll go ahead and do that. Left clicking and dragging, painting on this value of 0 on these areas I don't want the shoulder to affect. And you might have to click a couple times to get the full effect on there. Okay, so this edge loop right through here, I kind of want it to be kind of halfway, so I'm going to replace with 0.3 or so. We kind of paint through here a couple times, so that line now goes through the middle of the arm like that, middle of the underarm. And then this upper area, I'm going to add, increase that value, and paint a higher value here. Like so. This isn't perfect. I'm just kind of a little demonstration of how the painting weights kind of works. So the method that I tend to use again is replace with 0, but if I'm not using 0 for my value, I'll use add. And for example, let's look at the right shoulder now. So let's look at the right shoulder. Same kind of thing. So replace with 0, that's one way to do it, right? Now then there's also add. So let's say the right shoulder has all this weight down here, and I don't want all this weight under the arm to be with the right shoulder. Okay, what joint do I want that weight on? I want it to be on kind of one of these backbone joints. So I'm going to scroll up through here. Now I did not name those spine joints like I should have, but we have spine 1 down here, right there, spine 1. So this would be spine 2 essentially, and then this would be spine 3, and so on. So let's, for example, choose spine 3, which would be about this one. And let's say I want to add a value of 1, which is 100% full value, to this joint. So I can paint onto this joint and add those points on here. And it removes it from the shoulder joints. Okay, just kind of painting through here like so. And then let's go up to the next spinal joint up and add these points to that spine joint. So again, I'm adding the influence away, taking it away from the shoulder and adding it to those spine joints. And then I'm going to add just a little bit. I'm going to change the value down again to get that underarm down here to kind of come down a little bit, but not all the way. So it'll be something like this. So there's two ways you can do it. So you can replace with 0 on the current joint it has weight on it, or you can choose the weight you want to add it to and add that area of weight to that joint. So now if I choose the right shoulder, we can see how it's been modified with what I've done. I've removed that weight from the right shoulder and added it to those two spine joints. And again, I can continue to mess with these weight values, adding more weight for the shoulder up here. And this process is kind of tedious. It takes a lot of practice and time, and you might notice, oh, my joints aren't exactly positioned perfectly, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm not too worried about it right this second. So I can rotate these arms now, and you can see that they don't pull the middle of the torso out and around anymore. And it again is similar with the hip joints. When I rotate that hip right now, you can see that it kind of collapses inside his lower abdomen and his belly area. So again, if I select the mesh, go back to my paint weights, and look at my left hip, for example, you can see all that influence up through here that the left hip has on the geometry. So I'm going to replace with 0 for the left hip and paint all this stuff through here to remove that weight from the left hip. Now that weight has to go somewhere. So one danger, if you want to call it that, with adding 0 or replacing with 0 this weight, is the weight will automatically get redistributed to other influences that are around this area. Now you'll notice there's down here for the other leg, I don't want any influence from the left hip on the right leg, so I'm going to remove that also. So that's good enough for now. If I go to the right hip, I'll have the same kind of thing. So I'm going to remove all this influence that the right hip is having on the body. Pretty much like so. If I select the root joint now, you can see what the root is doing. I want to remove some of this influence that the root has down here on the legs, because I want them to be more controlled by the hips. So now I'm going to go to add left hip and change the value up to be just a smaller value, just to kind of fill in this area through here. Something like that. And this isn't a perfect job. I'm doing it kind of quickly, just for the sake, again, of showing how the paint weights thing works. So now I'm not collapsing that stomach area anymore. Could still tweak this hip area a bit more than it is now, but again, we'll move on for the sake of this demonstration. And you see that's been painted away already. It's not collapsing the stomach right now. So I'll select the mesh, I can go to Skin, go to Bind to Pose, and it returns to its original bound position. Another good place to paint the weights is the neck area. You see if I rotate the head the head kind of squishes a little bit and kind of collapses. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to select the model again, paint weights, and I don't think I actually named this joint. Let's select it. I'll go ahead and name it. Instead of joint 19, let's call it neck. Select the mesh, paint weights, and then in the list of influences I can find neck at some point. There it is, neck. And I want the neck to paint, I want the neck to have control of all the head. So I'm going to add a value of 1 and just kind of paint all over the head back here. Make sure that the head's not deforming when the neck joint rotates. All on top of the head over here. And I don't want the neck to be going into the upper chest area, so I'm going to replace with 0 this area. I don't want the neck to have that much influence down here. Okay, so now when I rotate, it's not like perfect by any means, but his head's not collapsing anymore. Okay, so some stuff could still be done with this, but I'm just going to move on for now. So the next step would be creating IK handles. I like to go to, let's close that. So I can go to Skeleton, Create IK Handle, Options. I'm going to reset my tool. So there's the current solver for the IK handle settings. And here you have two main options. We have single chain solver and rotate plane solver. Not to get into too much detail, but I tend to choose rotate plane solver. That's my preferred choice. It gives you some extra controls over the twisting of the shoulders and the hips, and allows you to use constraints to kind of position or point the elbows and knees where you want them to go. So I tend to use rotate plane solver. That's the kind of the only real change that I would make right now. So I'm going to close those options. And the way you add the IK handle is by left clicking on, for in this case, the left shoulder down to the left wrist. And you can see it creates an IK handle. Now as I move the IK handle around, you can see that my elbow is not exactly bending the way I expected it to. So I'm going to undo that. So you can see here I have a value of negative 13.868 or whatever in the rotate Y. I hit Control A to go into the attributes. And here in the joint area we have preferred angle. The preferred angle is the angle that the joint will prefer to rotate in. So I want it to rotate this way. So if I right click and say set preferred angle, you'll see the value it sets is negative 63 in the Y channel for preferred angle. So I'm going to undo that actually and put my elbow back to where it was, and I'm just going to type it in. Negative, we'll say negative 60, hit enter. We'll go ahead and do the same over here. I want it to bend this way, so if I right click and say set preferred angle, you see I have a negative 54 or whatever. I'm going to undo that so my elbow goes back to the way it was, and just type that in, negative 54, hit enter. So now with that set, I can go to Skeleton, Create IK Handle, click between these two joints, and now when I move the IK handle, the elbow rotates or bends like I expect it to because it's using that preferred angle. So now I have some hand controls using this IK handle. Let me undo all that movement. And apparently my video card has these little errors with how the IK handles render, but they still work fine. So I'll create another one for the other arm. Like so, and because I set the preferred angle, the elbow bends like I would expect it to. So I'm going to do the same for the knees down here. Control A. I'm going to rotate the knee back. This is how I would expect the knee to bend. Right click and say set preferred angle. And you can see how it sets all three. So in this particular case, because my rotate XYZ is all 0 right now, so I know that if I type 0 for rotate XYZ, it'll go back to the position I want it to be in. So I'm going to hit Control A for the attributes again. And I'm just going to rotate this back so I know this is the angle I want the joint to bend in. Right click and say set preferred angle. And now it just does 1, of course. I don't know why, but that's okay. Now we can just go up here and just type that in, back to 0, and goes back to where it was. Same thing here. I'm going to bend the knee back like this. Right click and say set preferred angle. And then type this 0 back like this. So now when I add an IK handle to the legs, they will also bend the way they should. So I'm going to skeleton, create IK handle, go from left hip to left ankle, and it bends like I would think. There's a little bit of weirdness going on right now with the knees, but that's okay, we can fix that later. Alright, so now we have our IK handles in place. There's another step I like to do is to create a pole vector constraint. So I'm going to go to create, and I like to use locators. Locators are these little dummy objects that Maya comes with. In the create menu, again it's under create locator. I'm going to put this locator back here behind the arm. I'll duplicate it and put another one back here behind the other arm. So I have two locators back behind both arms. I'm going to select this locator, hold shift and select the left arm IK. Go to constrain pole vector, like so. You can see this line shoot out across between the IK handle, or the shoulder I guess, to the locator. And again, we're selecting the locator first, holding shift and selecting the IK handle last, constrain pole vector. So the reason why we did that is if I now rotate or move my arm, I can then grab this locator, and as I move it, the elbow will always aim at the locator. So if I'm ever having any weirdness with my elbows where they're pointing in weird ways, I can just move these locators around, animate them with my character to always have the elbows pointing where I want them to go. Same with the legs. I'll grab this locator and just hit duplicate and put it up here in front of the left leg. Duplicate it again in front of the right leg like this. Select the locator, shift select the IK handle, constrain pole vector. Same here. Select this locator, shift select the other leg IK, constrain pole vector. And now if I move the knee, you can see what's happening is the knee is pointing at that locator. If I move the leg over here and then move the locator up here, you can see how the knee reacts. It points at that where that locator is going. So that's just the way we can control the leg a bit more securely. Another thing I'd like to do, since I have all these controls now in place, I can kind of move these feet in a little bit so he's not quite so bow-legged. Alright, so the next step would actually be what I would call the setting up a reverse foot control. I actually have a video going over that already. If you want to go check out that video, it kind of saved me some time here. So the reverse foot control video, you can click this little thumbnail and you can check out that video. Beyond that, the rigging is essentially done. Again, this is a very basic rig. You can do lots of more things with it to add more controls, more setup for things like set driven key and such like that. But you have your kind of basic skeleton here, or your basic rig, and you have your reverse foot controls if you check out that video. And from there you should be able to kind of expound on that and continue to develop your rigging. But this is, like I said, a very basic rig, and I hope you can take this foundation and build on it with more complexity as you learn more about rigging. Well, thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed the demonstration. Please feel free to like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the video series. If I missed something or if you have any questions, please feel free to comment and I'll reply as soon as I can. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you later.